On this week's Bet the Process podcast, we get political. We bring Dan Rosenheck in from The Economist, and we talk a lot about models in, the elections versus poly markets versus election markets. We do a little trip through college, and we do a little bit on Survivor. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of Bet the Process podcast. Sorry we were off last week. This is I feel like we should be plus point whatever in the rating system for our bye week. Like we should be better than we are. Point.
Look,
what's a bye worth?
teams get bye weeks. We get one bye week in the NFL season. This is how it works.
Yeah, but that means we actually should be better this week, not worse. Which we likely will.
Yeah, we're coming off the bye week.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like you modeled us. Although, I don't know if you listened to my podcast that I did without you, but the guy really has done quite a bit of modeling on the different values of buys based on home away versus types of things like that. And he had a pretty comprehensive look at how to model the bye week. It's not just Andy Reid off a bye week kind of thing.
I agree. And it's decreased over time.
Rufus, I'm still in Survivor, and you still haven't made a donation. I need to still pick a donation. I'm going to pick a charity.
I can't donate until you tell me where to.
Yeah, donate. I need to pick. I'll go on Twitter. I'll make an announcement of what charity that you're going to be announcing to, that you're going to be donating to. But I'm still in there. And what's interesting is, our friend Diggs, kind of messaged me on the side to explain to me some very interesting Survivor math. So when there's just two people left, what is the strategy that you should have? Does your strategy change at all, or should it change when there's only two of you left? What should your strategy be at that point?
Your strategy, I mean, you're optimizing for a very short-term time window, basically, right? You're literally it doesn't matter as much if you pick the same team. Let's say you know who your opponent's going to take. It's fine if you pick the same team per week, right? As long as it gives you a better opportunity in the future, right? So you shouldn't say, I'm going to take a suboptimal team here. So I guess it depends on who you have remaining. So in a way, actually, long-term does matter in that way, right? Because you can actually
the simplest way to say it was 2 weeks ago, I was thinking about taking the Texans against the Patriots, and the Eagles were available to take against Cleveland, and it was significantly a different money line. And I was saying, I'm going to take the Texans because I know he doesn't have the Texans to take, and that seems like a good one. And Diggs was like, well, if you're doing that, then you're just getting the worst of it, right? Like essentially, you're taking the Texans, he taking the Eagles, so you're getting the worst of it in a one-on-one.
What were the money lines there? Who was the bigger favorite?
The Eagles were the bigger favorite. I don't remember the exact money lines, but the spreads were like 9.5 and 7. So
yeah, you should never not take that.
Yeah, and that was his point. And he was saying there's some thought of future value, but it's very small, and in this case, it really isn't that much of an argument. And so he was basically saying it. And so my strategy now is just trying to get the best of it each week. So I'll look a little bit at future value, but really just trying to get the best of it. So
I guess the one argument where that would be different though is if and there's going to be a week in the future where your squad of teams still available to pick is worse than his, and so let's say you take the same team, the biggest favorite each week for a while, and then you're going to get to some week where you have to take a team that's worse than the team he has available, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
I'm just kind of looking a little bit.
You kind of use backwards induction, sort of take it let's say you both took the same team to the end of the year, right? I mean,
yeah. And then I'm still in another one that's $1 million one that, and these are all on Splash Sports, who are not sponsoring this podcast, but because they have before, we'll still mention that. And that one's $1 million, and there are only like 200 some people left.
Wow.
It was $100. It was $100 entry fee. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, you might win $1 million.
If I do, I will do something fun for listeners of this podcast. Maybe we'll do something fun for them. Anyways, it's only 7 people, so how much would I have to spend?
Can we ask Jeff how was your bye week?
How was my bye week? My bye week was great. I think we launched. I was actually at one of our resorts, one of Troon's resorts called Pronghorn, which is in Bend, Oregon. It has a Nicholas course and a Fazio course, and we did an offsite where we met in the mornings, and then we played golf in the afternoons. And the golf was awesome, and the courses are great. The resort is great. If any guys have a chance to go up there, I think it's a great place to do a guys trip because again, there's really not a ton to do in there besides the golf. There's like some great wellness stuff and whatnot, but it's in a beautiful place and the courses are awesome and the golf is awesome. Really one of the best practice facilities I've ever seen. So you can kind of go there and work on short game and food was great, service was great. Really enjoyed it.
Does the
So
practice facility have I mean, one thing that's always bothered me is that you can never practice a fairway bunker shot at a practice facility. You know,
it has
they need
reasonably
to have
long bunker shots you can take, but you can't have like, I mean, it's like
you need a
you're not
you
hitting a
need a
200
driving
yard
range
bunker
mat
shot.
with sand. Why
Okay.
don't they ever do that?
Just have a
Have a
sand,
sand mat, like a essentially a little localized, a very small box of sand there that people.
a sand trap. Sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Sure.
but
Fairway bunker
you don't need a
shots.
bunker. I mean, you just need to. You don't need that much sand for it.
Fairway bunker shots are definitely the least of my bunker shot concerns.
It's
I
fair, but
feel
I
like
feel like it's the weakness in a lot of people's games
yeah, I need to get to a point where that's the weakness in my game because that's going to
because
be
it's
a
something you don't
waste for me.
practice.
How was your bye week?
My bye week was good, Jeff. I got back to New York on I guess Sunday night, and I don't know if you know, but Saturday is my birthday,
I
and so
did know that. I saw some things. I forgot to wish you a happy birthday. Happy birthday.
thank you.
How old are
I
you?
actually
Was this 40? No.
no. You've already asked if you can be the person to plan the 40th birthday party. Remember this?
And that's 2 years away, right? 2 years away
That's
still?
next year.
Next year. All right. Let's go play
Yeah,
golf somewhere. That's a perfect time to go play golf.
this
We'll
isn't
do a
40
golf
yet,
trip.
but I spent actually the week really getting my apartment ready. I hosted a big party actually. It was kind of like a joint housewarming and birthday party and there I put a ton of time into getting the apartment I guess more finished and I bought like plants and furnished the patio and things like that and really prepped a ton and it turned out really well and there was a very big turnout over 45 people.
Got it.
It was a lot of fun. I just like being what I really love, Jeff, is getting my friends together. And I have friends from so many different areas of my life. And so it's like I have the college friends, I have the like Yale sailing team friends, I have the sports betting friends here. I have, I have all these random different sort of friend circles and kind of bringing them all together and having people meet each other from these different groups is really, really fun to me.
You like that kind of stuff.
I do.
How's your betting going?
Oh, we had one of our best weeks of the year last week, actually. We
Nice.
we did quite well in golf betting. We actually thought that there would be a almost two-stroke split between the Waves and the Shriners Open in Las Vegas, a two-stroke weather split,
And was there?
and which actually there was like a 3.5 stroke weather split. So we were like not only directionally correct, we were like, leveraged. We were very leveraged on the wave splits because, like, for example, Data Golf only had it as like a one stroke, for example. And so we were a
Those
whole
guys.
stroke higher almost, and we ended up going our way, despite the fact that play was delayed on Friday morning because there was too much wind, which is that's always the hard thing to model, right? It's like I think there's going to be this big weather effect. These guys are going to be playing in high wind, but then they say, "Oh no, it's the wind's too much. We're not going to play." But it still ended up being a massive effect, even bigger than we had anticipated. And so, uh, we kind of really did well on matchups as a result, and we had a decent week with college football. I mean, maybe like it was only like a 5% return, actually maybe a little less than that, and hit some NFL teasers, hit some like first half money lines. Basically, a good week on the sort of derivatives, and so it was a good week overall.
You want to give the little trip through college in our last few minutes here?
Sure, I got to open the spreadsheet up.
There you go. That
I
takes a
can
few
do that.
minutes. I've been getting crushed on my Tony Kornheiser picks this week. I think
Oh
betting
no.
into NFL sides is not easy.
Well, I mean, you've been doing so well in it in previous years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll turn it around, but it is like it is very demoralizing to lose those bets when you are on Kornheiser talking about them, and you know, like you're gonna have people say that you're worse than a monkey, which is what they do. So,
Is yeah.
um, what do you got this
Okay.
week for us,
So
Rufus?
if you wanna, well, when is the podcast gonna come out is the question. If it's gonna
So
come
it'll
out,
come out this afternoon or
I
this
could give out
early
something
evening.
for tonight's game with Middle Tennessee and Jacksonville State. I need to make sure
Yeah,
I'm quoting a proper price here, but we are on the Middle Tennessee side. We took it at plus 21. It's now plus 20 and a half. They're a
yeah.
awful team, but you know, sometimes I
Middle
like betting
Tennessee
on
is
them.
not very good.
No, they're very bad at football.
Yeah, that's the type
Um,
of team that you end up betting on.
Sometimes we bet on good teams though. We
No,
like
I'm
we
just
like
I'm just saying I meant you like the metaphorical you.
yeah.
Anything else? Give us some of the good marquee interesting games.
Okay. What's a big game? Oklahoma Ole Miss, does that count?
Yeah, that definitely counts. That's
So
a Ole Miss is like rated very highly on SP Plus, I saw.
yeah, like the offensive coordinator got fired on Sunday for Oklahoma. So this is one of those where you, there's one of these things that we don't know exactly how to quantify. We don't even try to. And that spread is right now Ole Miss minus 20. We we took plus 21. And
Hmm.
yeah, again, we what's the Massey Peabody number there? Looks to be my model average is about 16.9. So are there any other big matchups? Oh, you have Notre Dame against Navy, the annual, and that's, both Navy and Army are undefeated this year, Jeff.
Yeah, I happened to see that the other day.
Pretty cool.
Army is like torching
They're just
teams.
torching everybody.
Yeah. What do you make
So
that line?
Notre Dame Navy neutral field, we make so we like Notre Dame there. We do. And I've been a little low on Navy, unfortunately, and Army this year.
What do you make that line? Notre Dame Navy.
I make the line 20.
Wow. So you really love Notre Dame.
Yeah. And what
Wow.
is it, 15 now? It's moved up like that line. If you look at it opened, I believe Circa opened it at, I'm gonna pull up what Circa opened it at. Oh, they opened at 14. It dropped all the way down to 11, 11 and a half. Now it's up to 13. We got it at 11 and a half, which is nice. I wonder, I wonder what that initial move was for. I mean, well, actually, Circa opened it at 14. The initial move immediately was up 2 points to 16, but then it gradually went down. It bottomed out at 11, and now it's back up to 13.
How about Missouri, Alabama? By the way, is Alabama, I don't know if you look at this stuff, but is Alabama out?
I mean, they have two losses, and I think if they win out, they're probably in the playoff, right? But are they going to win out?
What do you
And
make the Alabama
and it depends
Missouri
on what other
game?
teams do. What do I make that game? I make it actually Alabama minus slightly over 10. So I did not take Missouri here though. Some of the other things we average out, like we're kind of more on the Alabama side, so we did not play Missouri. But if we had to pick a side there, we would take Missouri.
All right, there you go. Maybe one more. A&M LSU. That's actually a good game.
LSU and A&M. It looks like we do not have an opinion there at all.
All right.
Let me find a game that we do. We need like a game that actually is interesting. Oh, Baylor, Oklahoma State. Is that interesting? Not
Sure.
really.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
We lean Baylor there. We took Baylor at 6.5. It's where is it now?
6.5 right now.
6.5. Yeah.
All right. Um, Let's welcome in Dan Rosenheck to the Bet the Process podcast to talk a little bit of political forecasting, and then we'll talk to you guys all again in a week where I'll ask Rufus his presidential pick. So wait with bated breath. We now welcome in Dan Rosenheck to the Bet the Process podcast to talk about something that is I would say people have interest in right now. This election, I heard. I didn't even know what day it was. I literally had to ask Dan what day it was. That's how much I care about this at this point right now. But anyways, all that being said, Rufus, you got to be in your bonnet about the elections and the election modeling and the election betting, and
I
you've been
do.
poking and prodding people. I think so. I mean, you've been poking and prodding people like Harry Kane and yeah. Well, what? Go
I
ahead.
Harry
mean,
Kane, the
I
soccer
find
player?
that yeah, slash the Mad Men character, but I don't know. I find it
Henry Crane. What
interesting.
is whatever hell his name is?
Harry Crane.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean he's gone after Nate pretty hard, just trolled him and basically said, "Oh, Nate's forecast is basically for clickbait. It's just lagging behind Polymarket." I mean, you look at some of the stuff he's tweeted, it's kind of just trolled him. And Nate kind of bit back and was like, "This guy supposedly has a PhD, but doesn't actually understand how probability works." And so I kind of was like, who do people think's right here? Nate or Harry or
So you
neither?
you were you yourself were clickbait, basically. So
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of like, let's see what the people think. And then it's funny though. Then Harry retweeted it or quote tweeted the poll, and his vote composition changed big time after that. It was like running 4-1 Nate with honestly like 30% people 30% of people being neithers. And then Harry ended up actually winning that poll or getting the plurality. But it does bias it if your followers are voting and Nate's followers aren't.
okay,
Maybe this
let's move on.
segues well into polling and
There we go.
trying to predict the composition of the electorate.
Yes. Do you want to jump into it with our guest?
Honestly, I feel like that's kind of jumping too far into the weeds, but broadly speaking, Dan, I mean Dan runs the Economist's prediction model, which right now has Donald Trump at 56%, Nate Silver's is 53.1%, and 538 is Trump at 52%. So they're all, I don't want to say, I mean, you're the highest on Trump of any of those, but still below Polymarket, which has Trump at 66%, and Kalshi and Betfair both have Trump at 60%. So the markets are higher than you are. The markets are higher than even higher than Nate is. Broadly speaking, why is that the case? And is there alpha there?
So two quick points on that gap. The first is that we've seen a version of this before. Throughout the 2020 cycle, betting markets were higher on Trump's win probability than quantitative poll-based models were, although they still favored Biden. They just had Biden as a narrower favorite than the poll-based models did. And one interpretation of that is that the betting markets correctly anticipated a polling error in Trump's favor, whereas the poll-based models were assuming symmetrically distributed errors. Now, that isn't proof of prediction markets having some, Nostradamus-like wisdom. It could be a stop clock being right on a sample of one election, but there's a precedent for prediction markets, in particular, liking Trump more than models do. What strikes me a bit about this cycle, or at least the Harris portion of this cycle, leaving aside the Biden portion, um, is that discrepancy is more recent. Until a couple of weeks ago, I believe the markets and the models were in sync at, you know, Harris is a barely a favorite, but a favorite. And then there were sort of, it was a week or two when when markets started moving towards Trump. And this was the period in which this mysterious trader or consortium of traders named Freddie with some number of nines after his name apparently started buying bucket loads of Trump on Polymarket. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. And that led to all this discussion about whether or not the markets were being quote unquote manipulated by a whale or whales, because the quant models, which of course just derived from the polling averages, did not show even incremental movement towards Trump in that period. Instead, they were sticking at roughly, I don't know, 52-48 Harris or something. Then, in the past week or two, the models, most abruptly ours, which was kind of sticking to its guns on Harris being a narrow favorite until last the end of last week, and then this week has really quite sharply moved towards Trump, about 10 percentage points, um, have kind of caught up to where the markets were a week or two ago, when people were wondering why the markets were friendlier to Trump than the models were. And it would be one thing if the markets stayed where they were at, like, 58-42 Trump, and the models then caught up. But in fact, the markets have continued to drift towards Trump and are now still sort of 5 or 10 points higher on him than the models are. But the whole window has shifted Trumpwards. So this is a recent phenomenon within the Harris portion of the race, and I think that there is, you can tell the Freddie 9999999 story about one whale, but given that we see something similar, albeit to a smaller degree across lots of different markets, I think the likeliest explanation is that there is an inevitable lag between when pollsters do their field work and when those polls get released, and then it takes a day for models to digest them, and depending on how aggressively those models react to new data, uh, they may take a few days more to sort of see if that trend is real. Whereas lots of people in the world have access to either pre-publication public poll data or private poll data, campaign internals or whatever, that probably broadly show something similar to what forthcoming public polls will show. And it wouldn't take many people with that kind of inside information about future poll movements to be trading on it to get the kind of pattern that you've seen over the past couple weeks, which is the markets essentially being a few days ahead of the models.
So the fact that the market has been leading basically at all points here, and the models have been following, I mean, based on that, should we even look at the models? I mean, it's like the market is getting the closing line value, right? If you don't want to bet into something and you're betting based on a model that is essentially lagging in time.
On a sample of the past 2 weeks, yes, I agree with you. I don't think there's any guarantee that that will continue to be the case. We've still got another 2 weeks until the election. There's plenty of time for things to stabilize or shift back in the other direction. There's still a gap, and we'll know more in a week. But I wouldn't over extrapolate that that the markets are always going to be the leading indicator and models are always going to be the laggard based on literally 2 weeks of data.
Although you did say that there's inside information potentially, and so if that's the case, then wouldn't we expect something with non-public information to continue to do better than just the public information?
All else equal, yes. You and I can both think of lots of notorious examples where um, prediction markets have been wrong to ludicrously wrong, and just following the public data would have uh, served you better. And I believe Rufus, your own trading on that strategy has been profitable in previous years, and that's a larger sample than the past 2 weeks. But I would definitely encourage people who are considering wading into these markets or who are active in these markets to uh, think through methodically uh, what are the potential types or sources of information that might be priced into these markets that public models don't know before blindly betting on what we or Nate Silver of 538 say.
So what's interesting to me about this is this highlights this kind of interesting model versus market mentality. Like we talk about this a lot in sports, where um how valuable is a model? Sorry, how valuable is a market versus a model? How much should you regress to a market when you have a model? Like how do you think through this? And then what's more interesting to me about this is like the difference between sports modeling and election modeling, where in election modeling you are actually almost trying to predict what a market is doing anyways, right? Like you're not predicting a sports event, you're predicting a market, like public opinion. You're like,
Well, no,
so it's
you're
like the
predicting an election result, right? You could
which is
trade it
based
out
on
of
which is based on public opinion. It's far different
that.
than predicting what's happening on the field, right? Ultimately, you are predicting public opinion, which is what a market is, right? So it's you don't see that it's a hugely different than modeling a sporting event, especially when you try to value what these markets are and how liquid they are. And ultimately, like I don't know if you guys take any credence to the idea that some of this like market manipulation is about like Russian interference or Russian like trying to like create a narrative that the election was stolen and create more. This is a real thing, obviously, that I'm not saying this is a case in this case with Russia, but like Russia is certainly looking to create opportunities to create conflict and havoc within the United States. So that's something they for sure did in the last two elections. Obviously, like my time at Twitter, it was pretty clear that we were seeing that. So again, like when you think about valuing a market, right? And here we have like you two are two big modelers, right? Rufus, you're a big sports modeler. Dan, you're now a big election modeler. How do you guys think about the value of the market in the work you do? Dan, I'm assuming you don't regress to any model in your market right now, but Rufus, you
By the
do,
way,
right? So how do you think?
regress to a market in my model? No, we don't. The only info that our model eats are polls, economic data, and historical voting data.
Right. And Rufus, you do regress to a model in sports, right? So it's like what that's
The
obviously
market,
there's up.
yeah,
What's that? Regress
to a
to a market,
market,
right? Right.
either explicitly or implicitly, yes.
So do you think that Dan should regress his model to a market?
Well, I'm sure he is. If he, I don't
He
think
just
he's
said he
betting on it,
isn't.
but if he were betting on it, I think he would probably look at the market too. And I mean, am I right there, Dan, saying that you wouldn't just blindly say, okay, my model's 100% correct. That's the true price.
Yeah, I think you need to, as I just said, on one hand, you need to think through methodically and be cognizant of what information might be out there shaping the market price that is not incorporated or not fully incorporated into your model. On the other, if you think that the market is always right and you're an efficient markets fundamentalist, then you'll you'll never play and you'll never make any money because you'll never think you have any edge. And clearly, lots and lots of people, unlike, I mean, leaving aside the question of whether it's possible to be the stock market, I certainly believe it is very possible to be a consistently profitable political prediction market participant if you know what you're doing. So clearly, I think that, you know, uh, regressing to market 100% and therefore never betting is leaving value on the table. I do think that obviously anything that is hard data that you can build into your model, you will. And the more of that you do and the more effectively you do that, the less room there is for stuff to be um, priced into the market that your model doesn't know about. And that would give you more confidence that when you see a gap between what you think the true odds are and what the market says, you're the one with the right answer. But um, but if you see a giant gap, um, that it could be, to take sort of a canonical example, it could be December of 2020, and Biden has won all these states, and yet there are a lot of people betting a lot of money that Trump is going to somehow win them. And that's not a quant versus market decision. That's just ultimately that's a legal prediction. But I wouldn't have had a lot of respect for the market price there. So uh, you know clearly, not all circumstances are created equal, and sometimes you have to use good judgment, which is, not very actionable advice.
Nate Silver's always he's kind of shit on the market a little bit in the past by basically saying these are not sophisticated market participants. And we've kind of made a parallel to sports betting where like most participants in a sports betting market are not sophisticated either and are driven by emotion or fandom or whatever. I think clearly the example in December 2020 sort of shows how political leanings and conspiracy theories and all that can actually get priced into a market. But it's certainly an interesting topic.
Well, I mean, what would you have priced December 2020? Like, certainly it was not 100-0 at that point, right?
But it doesn't have to be
98 and a half.
Here's the point. There's transaction costs, so it shouldn't trade at 98% because of that, right? I mean, there aren't opportunities unless it trades lower. I mean, if you look at how much it costs to actually take your money out and things like that, like it makes sense that it depends on the exchange or whatever, but it makes sense that it wasn't 100%. And clearly, given what actually happened, and was it January 5th or January 6th? I don't even remember.
January
6th.
Okay.
Well, at least I know that date. I might not know when the election was, but I know that date.
Given what happened then, I mean, clearly there was a non-zero chance that election results could have been changed or overturned. I mean, I personally agree that I think there was a betting opportunity there, but there's also the time value of money piece where you're holding money for a month. And so
okay, let's move off from this. This is less interesting than so what I'm interested in, and Rufus, I know you have a bunch of questions, so let's move quickly through this. We're lagging on certain things, but what really fundamentally happened over the last, say, month that shifted this to the point, like, do you, like, if you look into your model, I don't want to just hear like, oh, that's what I want to hear, like, I assume your model is not a black box. There's some explainability. So what's the explainability? And then one step further, what are the reasons that those factors changed in your mind? Obviously, you don't know for sure, but it would be interesting to understand if you were creating a narrative around this. Like if we had to put you on ESPN elections and we said, hey, Dan, explain to us why this happened. And you're not allowed to say like, oh, well, my coefficients, but you actually have to dive into the reason. What would the reasons be? Say the top 3 reasons you think that things have shifted in Trump's favor, both from a modeling and a marketing perspective.
I think I have one reason, not three. I can try to divvy it up, but
No,
the over.
one reason's better than three. I always do
Okay.
three because it's like the magical number. But what's the number
Okay.
reason?
I mean, this so obvious it's not informative answer is our model moved because the polls moved. And that then leads to two next step questions, which is how did the polls move and why? And I think that the way that the polls moved uh, does give you a little hint as to why the polls moved. So we do not see any significant sort of electoral college jujitsu here. We basically show Trump on margin, and this is important, on margin, picking up about 2 points on Harris nationally from her high water mark in September after the debate to now. And we see moves in the same direction, albeit of varying magnitudes, in state level polling everywhere, including in the swing states that will determine the election. Now that still leaves a question of, okay, well, why did the polls everywhere move towards Trump over the past few weeks, both nationally and in the states that comprise that nation? And there, I actually think you can kind of get a clue or a hint if you disaggregate that margin into its sort of two constituent numbers. If you look at our national polling averages, which we publish on the same site as our forecast, and other polling averages probably do the same thing. You don't see the kind of mirror image effect where, when one candidate goes up, the other goes down, and you have a strong negative correlation in their vote shares that you would get if you really had people meaningfully changing their minds between whether they were going to support Harris or support Trump. That kind of +1 for one side is -1 for the other. Instead, what you see is the undecided and third party share um, shrinking in kind of two distinct steps, where from the time Harris becomes the presumptive nominee until roughly the Democratic convention in mid-August, she picks up, like, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 3, maybe 4 points of vote share coming almost entirely from undecided and third party, whereas Trump's vote share is pretty much flat. And that certainly is suggestive of the story that you had a lot of disillusioned Democrats, liberals, left leaners who didn't love Biden. And once there was a candidate that their team was more excited about, they jumped on board that bandwagon, or pick your metaphor. But most of them were probably going to come home eventually, albeit not enough of them for Biden to have won the election. We all think he would have been quite likely to lose if he had remained the nominee. Then in the past few weeks, if you believe that story, then it would stand to reason that the remaining undecided and third party voters who didn't move towards Harris over the hot brat summer might have been a more Republican leaning pool of soft conservative support. And sure enough, over the past few weeks, Harris has stayed flat at 49% nationally in our polling average, and Trump has ticked up from 45 to 47. And that does, again, kind of tell me a story that these are probably Republican leaners who were probably always going to come home to him eventually. Now, was that something you could or should have foreseen? Possibly. Was it something that traders and prediction markets foresaw? Quite possibly. It's not something, at least, that our model is currently designed to do. Our model just looks at two-party vote share and doesn't sort of doesn't attempt to discern kind of how many undecided third-party voters are of those who are left, which way they might lean. It is true that I remember in 2016, we just looked at the crosstabs from we have a polling partnership with YouGov I remember writing in 2016 on the morning of the election, if you looked at our YouGov crosstabs and you looked at all the undecided third party voters, what was their party ID, who did they support last time, it was kind of a Republican Romney leaning group, and I did write that's a good sign for Trump. So who knows, maybe in future cycles we'll try to work something like that.
When you think then about what the next, say, week and a half looks like, what's the path? Is there still a group of undecideds that are going to be won over? Like, what is, like I was listening this morning to NPR, and they were talking a little bit about, Trump's strategy right now is really about turnout. Like, he doesn't really, he doesn't believe that he needs to convert any people or win any people over. It's all about turnout. And obviously that's a very common political notion or strategy. Do you believe that's true, or like, are there middle people to be won over, or what dictates this right now? Like, could there be another swing in the vote like, when do you do your last model? The day of the election, I assume.
Yeah.
So what do you, if you use your silver ball right now, what does that look like on the day of the election? Does it move more towards Trump or more towards Kamala, or does it stay the same?
I have the most annoying answer, which is, if your model is any good, and goes back to what you were talking earlier about Talib's critique, it should be what is called a martingale series, which means that your best prediction of the future values of the series is the current value, and where you've come from before that doesn't matter. And I do genuinely believe that we have a symmetrical cone of uncertainty around our current estimate, and my best prediction of where we'll be in 2 weeks as a point estimate is where we are now. I'm sorry I can't offer you anything more interesting, but that is genuinely what I think. What I would emphasize is that, unlike in 2016, where you had these massive by modern standards, oscillations in the Clinton-Trump margin, where it kept going up and down from Hillary leading by 7 or 8 to leading by 1, and with all of that action pretty much coming from undecided third party, again, with Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. This year, particularly since RFK left the race, there are precious few undecideds left. I mean, we're at 49, 47, so that's 96% already declared or committed. And we've had relatively stable polls since August. That suggests to me that, I mean, never say never, but your best estimate for polling volatility over the final 2 weeks is going to be low, and certainly lower than it was in 2016 when you had all these undecideds and a kind of track record in that cycle of huge volatility in polling. So what I would emphasize is that I don't think there's enough time left for it to be likely that we would see, a 3-point on margin move in either direction, something that would move a forecast like ours from something close to 50-50 to like 70-30 either way. I think it's extremely likely that our forecast for the favorite will start with either a 5 or a 6, and probably a 5. But what I would emphasize is that there's two components to that, to the uncertainty over the election result. One is how much the polls and therefore models move between now and the election, and the other is the election day polling error. And election day polling errors are big, as we saw in the past couple cycles, and we have no reason to expect that they'll be, meaningfully smaller this time than any other time. So just because we're going to be probably something close to a tied mean estimate in the swing states does not mean that, we should therefore expect a nail biter election. It's totally possible. In fact, almost likely that there will be some correlated national polling error that will deliver, 6 or even 7 of the swing states to the victorious candidate, and it'll be decisive, and we'll know the result pretty quickly.
So can we say in a way that it really comes down to, like, this one really unknowable thing, which is, I guess, the polling error, which is what the composition, which is basically what the polls are trying to figure out, like what the composition of the electorate's going to be.
If you simplify it to turnout, then you are making two assumptions, which is either that all the undecided third party won't vote, or they'll break 50-50, or they'll break proportionately to the decided, and you're assuming that everyone is telling you the truth. And I don't think either of those assumptions are valid. I mean, you can decompose polling error into lots of different pieces, and turnout modeling is only one piece of it. But yes, I think it the uncertainty in the result comes down to broadly uh, the eventual gap between what swing state polls show and what the result will be, and that is kind of intrinsically hard to predict because you have the entire polling industry doing its best to get it right. And if there were an easy way to predict the direction and magnitude of that polling error, the pollsters probably would have adjusted already to try to account for it. So there's kind of market dynamics there that lead it to be pretty close to mean zero.
Okay, so when we talk about like people manipulating, when we talked about before, the Freddie 9999 guy or girl or consortium, and there was this.
Do you want to tell your listeners what that is?
There was this discussion, I guess, or in the media about whether there were people that were saying that they were manipulating the odds. Now, what I fail to understand is what value that would have. So, for example, if you support Trump, why would you want Trump's probability of winning to be higher in a prediction market? I understand that if you're like a third party candidate, not a third party candidate, you're like a fringe candidate in a primary, and it makes you could manipulate it to make yourself seem legitimate to get more coverage. But at this point, I don't think that's the case. And it does, to me, it almost feels like Democrats are going to be more likely to turn out if they think Trump is likelier to win. Or is the whole point to say, okay, make it look like the outcome? If there was manipulation, would it be to make it look like the outcome is decided so people don't turn out? Please enlighten me.
I don't have a great answer on this. I think there's a general pattern component and then a Trump specific component. I share your befuddlement at the sort of general pattern trend assumption that a party or candidate or campaign wants the public to think that they are up. I would kind of think that you would be in an optimal position to turn out your own side if your own side thought they were like a point down. But uh, there's definitely an empirical pattern that when parties, candidates, or campaigns release internal polls, on average, those polls do tend to show better numbers for the side behind them than like a nonpartisan polling average. Why parties think it helps them to release polls that happen to show them up? Um, uh, I actually don't understand the logic or
Makes them seem
mechanism.
stronger, right? You want your candidate to seem strong.
Maybe. I mean, I agree with you that if you're if you're trying to prove yourself as viable and get media coverage, or there's definitely kind of snowball avalanche effects where you need people to think you're viable in order to get money, which in turn makes you viable, etc. But yes, you're right. In a presidential general election campaign, that's certainly not the case. I do think there could be a Trump specific factor here, which is um, uh, I think we all assume that if he loses fair and square, he will not go gently into that good night. And um, anything and everything people on his side can do to preemptively generate the conditions for a narrative of another set of false claims of a stolen or rigged election. If your strategy, as I believe his is a kind of heads I win, tails you lose thing, where if he wins legitimately, great. If not, he screams fraud. Then anything and everything you can do to say, well, the polls showed me up, or the markets had me up, or whatever, would, be incrementally strengthen that narrative generating campaign. But the overall pattern on why campaigns like to release polls showing themselves ahead, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you.
Okay, so last question. And this is a betting podcast, and we have 7 listeners who, probably might want to place a
Myself
bet.
being one of them.
Okay, so we have 6 other listeners. If you were, what betting opportunities are out there that you think that our listeners should be attuned to? I.e., if you were betting, where would you be looking?
It's exactly what, with the disclaimer that I am not, in fact, betting on this election. It's exactly what I just mentioned. I think that there is an easy to make assumption that if the polls are close, the election will be close. And there's got to be money in the tails. And I know there are contracts on Polymarket for will either candidate sweep all 7 swing states? Will Trump sweep all 7? Weirdly, there's only will Kamala sweep. I don't know if it's 6 of the 7, any 6 of the 7. Is it a specific 6 or any 6?
It's specific 6. The one they don't include is North Carolina.
North Carolina, which now is polling slightly to the left of Georgia, which is funny. But yeah, I mean, even just I'd have to. I haven't checked the current pricing. I haven't. We'd have to dig into our model sims. I know Nate Silver is now publishes his model sim, so you can see what share of his total pie of probability one candidate sweeps all 7, and it's super high. It's like 40%
right now, like 39.9.
And it's probably, I mean, like Harris. I think Harris has like 15. It has like in Nate's model has like a 15% chance of that, and like I'm sure there's and like the Polymarket numbers, particularly if you were to bet like yes, one candidate sweeps all 7, no, it won't be Trump. Just take both of those. I mean, you'd be getting 20-1 on a Harris sweep or something, and that's obviously like if you believe that the state polling errors are likely to be correlated, that's obviously monstrous expected value.
Yes, you'd be getting 20-1 in a sense, but you'd be having to tie up more money to create, in essence. You're saying create an artificial market
for 2 weeks.
Well, right, but that's money you can't put into other particular markets for the election.
Yes, true.
That's the point, because there is stickiness in getting money on there and all that.
Yeah, it is definitely true that you are tying up half. You'd be tying up half at a 0%, at a guaranteed 0% return, in order to get the 20-1 or whatever on the other half. But yeah, I mean, in particular, the Harris landslide universe, which is not likely, but very much is plausible, has to be
and that's
where
priced.
the value.
I mean, Nate has that at 15%. It's priced at Polymarket at 9%, but you could create artificially.
No, I think the Polymarket 9% is on 6 states.
Yeah, although Nate doesn't actually have the 6. It's a less than 1% chance of Democrats sweeping the 6th and that are not North Carolina, and Republicans winning North Carolina. It's not on the most common thing. So, but my point is, but to Dan's point, you can create something artificially that like an artificial payoff that's essentially like a 6%. However, however, you're having to tie up a lot more money to do that.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean that's you know that's got to be the inefficiency.
There's clearly, I mean, hell, there's clearly arbitrage opportunities. You could in general, you could trade if you have access to all these markets. You could sell Trump, who's 66% on Polymarket, and buy him at Kalshi at 60%, right? So there are clearly
that's free money.
opportunities.
Minus transaction.
Well, and platform risk.
Yeah, you don't get paid out.
Right. You know, Polymarket like could go under, right? FTX went under.
InTrade sure did.
Anyway, Dan, we really appreciate having you on. Good luck with the forecasts, and hopefully it reflects well. Hopefully the outcome is, reflects well on your process.
Thank you. Yes.
Who just
Just say good luck.
last one thing. You got to say one thing. Who wins? Who wins?
Ooh, I like this.
The most boring answer at evens. Trump.
No.
Barely.
Who wins?
Oh, no,
I'm not asking. They're not asking you to bet on. I'm saying who wins? Who wins?
Who wins?
It's a very simple question. Who wins?
It's got to be whoever I have it ever so slightly higher than 50. If you're holding a gun to my head, it's Trump.
You're saying Trump wins.
Trump.
All right. Okay.
But you know better than to round up 55 to 100.
I don't.
We just wanted to pick.
So I'm not that good at math. So, all right. Thank you for joining us. We'll get you out of here. And we'll all look forward to a very interesting election day.
Thanks, guys.